Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Korra discussion video. In this one I want to talk more generally about the Korra 10-year anniversary that happened yesterday. So yesterday I put out a video as part of a YouTuber project, One Legendary Scene, where I talked about my kind of scene of choice, which was Korra deciding to keep the spirit portals open from the Book 2 Spirits finale. But that meant that on the day I didn't really get a chance in a video to talk just generally about the anniversary and what was happening. But I actually think doing this the day after makes for maybe a little bit of a better discussion, in that we can talk about what did or didn't happen, like officially, from like official sources yesterday. So I suppose there's two avenues of discussion here. One is, officially, did anything happen to make the anniversary anything more than what it actually was? And then two is obviously the fans themselves, us, celebrating the anniversary itself. One of them was just sort of like they did the bare minimum, and the other one I felt like the fandom really did go all out to celebrate Korra and, feel like a super positive day for Korra as a franchise. So I don't want to spend too much time basically complaining about the lack of Korra stuff officially, but I think it does need to be acknowledged that the 10th anniversary realistically is going to be Korra's biggest anniversary. We'll go on, years will pass, and there'll be other key anniversaries, but I think the 10th one, and especially with this happening when it's happening, like Avatar Studios has been announced, we're building up to stuff there, and Avatar and Korra are both very, very popular. There's been a resurgence in the Avatar fandom since both shows came back to Netflix a few years ago. That hype has sort of died off a little bit, but it's come back up a little bit, just with news and bits and pieces happening. So this feels like the opportunity to do something on the anniversary, and for the most part they didn't. The official channels did post about the anniversary, but they all just sort of posted, a video clip compilation type thing, and a just brief thing, a decade of Korra, just literally just saying the anniversary is happening. Kind of the same thing most fans are doing, but because they're like the official source, it just kind of feels like that's all. This logo here, you can see on screen, did come out of it, so that's kind of nice. I think it's a pretty well constructed logo. It looks very cool, like the font for Korra. It's just very kind of clean, and I do like what they did here. So something at least came out of it. Not that it matters sort of too much, but I think people were maybe expecting that there'd be some announcement to go along with this. Maybe nothing huge, but just anything. Like, might they release the Korra soundtrack at last? Might there be a comic announcement, a merchandise announcement? But no, nothing actually happened. And in fact, if you look at everything happening around it, the main thing of note you'll notice is that Patterns in Time got delayed like 2 days before the anniversary. It got pushed back to September. So that book has now been delayed every single month since it's been announced. Going from originally going to be released, the day before the anniversary on the 13th of April, to now it's like September, and who knows if that will be the final release date for that book. That could have been a really cool thing to have just before the anniversary, even though those compilations, especially because half of it's going to be reprints, it would only be 2-3 short stories, but it would be something on the anniversary. And so the unfortunate thing is that they don't really have a release for the anniversary. Thankfully, there is the Free Comic Book Day book coming out May 7th, so that's not too far away. It does have a Korra story as part of it, even though ATLA is the cover story. We don't know anything about what the Korra or Avatar books are about, other than, I guess, Aang will be in the ATLA one. So there's not much to speculate on there. And then, it's September for the next Korra release. And it's to the point now where the Yang Chen novel, which just recently got announced, is actually out before the comic, which has been planned for months. Absolutely crazy how that has actually come about. And you start to ask more questions, I think. That's the big thing with this, is that you start to ask, wait, why don't we have any Korra merch? Where is anything Korra related? We have 3 different ATLA action figure lines. And we know McFarlane is going to be doing Korra figures, but there's been no announcement yet. Admittedly, with them, there's also not really been much of an announcement about like a wave 2, 3, more figures for ATLA for them. But what's going on there? Where's the next Korra Funko Pops? They're more teasing more ATLA Funko Pops than anything. It's just frustrating when you look at like deep into the releases of merchandise and you see that the only Korra stuff is sort of like generic sort of magnets with a stock image, or this like buttons, like pin buttons with stock images on them. And then the only like notable merchandise for Korra seems to be the pop-up parade Korra figure, which hasn't even been like officially properly announced yet. We just know it's going to be a thing. And I guess we'll maybe get initial pictures of that in the coming months as they properly reveal that, along with the Aang Nendoroid. Hopefully they can be successful and lead to more Korra merch. But it is frustrating that just this year, big anniversary, there's nothing here to really help celebrate that necessarily. The other thing, obviously, that comes into mind at this point is probably the Korra comic trilogy that was all but announced by Dark Horse. They even had some of the people, like the editorial kind of people on it, mentioning it on Twitter that like, hey, Korra comic trilogy is coming. And then that still hasn't happened. Avatar Studios has clearly led to something happening there, which then leads you to go like, wait, Avatar Studios still feels like it basically doesn't exist, and that none of the posts about this felt like it came from Avatar Studios. Like, did Mike and Brian even say anything about the anniversary? So what's going on there? So officially not great, even though it was acknowledged. But the success of the anniversary is, of course, that the fandom came out and like everyone was posting about it. It's a major anniversary for us as fans, because this was the debut of the like second Avatar show. And I know a lot of new people in the fandom have come in since the show's return to Netflix and maybe weren't part of things back when Korra actually first aired. But I really want to get across just how exciting a time in the fandom it was back in the immediate lead up to and the airing of Book 1 air. Things were crazy. As someone who obviously helped to run a fan site during that time, Avatar The Last Airbender Online.com, we had a really good community and people were just so excited as we were like releasing the podcast. I was doing episode reviews on the site. The forums were doing really well. Lots of speculation, because the book, I think, really lent into the idea that you can speculate quite heavily about things, because there was that mystery around like Amon, the Yacon family, and what exactly is going on there. There was so much speculation in between episodes about what's going on. It was really, really intense, in the fandom, just like how passionate everyone was about this. Obviously, as things went on, that excitement became less and less. And a lot of this, again, comes down to the lack of support from official sources, mainly Nickelodeon back then, of 15 months between Book 1 and 2, with basically no news until just before Book 2 actually aired. That lost a lot of fans. A lot of the hype did die off, and it never, I think, quite achieved what it was at back in Book 1. And then the conversation, a lot of the general stuff around Book 3 and 4 was more with, what's Nickelodeon doing? Why are they constantly changing the TV time slot for the show? Are they trying to make this fail? And then they pull it off TV in the middle of Book 3, and it's just an online kind of only show. Still doing well from what we could tell with regards to numbers online and when like they eventually aired it on TV, but a huge sense that for whatever reason Nickelodeon just lost all its confidence that it had in Korra, and it obviously ended in such a way where most fans at the time felt that, why would Mike and Brian ever want to come back and do a show for Nickelodeon when this is the way the show gets treated, in a way they get treated, because again, there was the whole book 4 budget cut thing that led to basically Remembrances being what it is and not being a full episode, and all that sort of stuff. Now, obviously, I think there is a little bit of a different atmosphere around things now, because I think the high-ups know how popular Avatar and Korra is, know that this show that they didn't support actually has a huge fan base around it, and if they do things right, they can definitely make something very, very successful. And so, yes, I think it's right to have some doubts going into Avatar Studios about, like, are we seeing some of that stuff begin to come out again with Nickelodeon, Viacom, just the high-ups? But you have to have some confidence just because of the scope of what Avatar Studios seems to be. And as well, the fact that it's going to be going up on a streaming platform and not necessarily airing on the television channel Nickelodeon does make things work differently. That's definitely a big thing. That Korra, when it was airing, definitely felt like it was at that interesting transition point where it felt like it was kind of, in a way, one of the forerunners for highlighting the idea of just a show that is sort of online only and isn't necessarily all about the TV ratings. I think that's a point I made a lot during Korra airing and what was happening. Just because, like, the idea of, like, I haven't watched, like, TV shows regularly, like, on TV in years. So everything pretty much I watch is online in some way. Even going back to, like, 2012, pretty much. So it speaks to the idea that, like, things were obviously very different as we go into this new era. And Korra was at, like, that weird point where, like, it's kind of the crossover. Because you'll remember interesting things like the fact that they actually premiered the first 2 episodes of Korra online through Coronation in the weeks leading up to the premiere. So people watched the first 2 episodes online ahead of April 14th. They did similar things over the course of the run of Korra, like the book 2 Spirits finale. I think it was like the last 2 episodes. They premiered online ahead of the premiere date. And that, I think we have, like, I think Mike and Brian put out something that said that, like, they did really insane numbers with regards to, like, online views for that premiere. That was, the thing that really highlighted that, okay, we're actually doing stuff here. But going back to the point I was making at the start, the other thing that is sort of defining of the Korra fandom while it was airing is the lack of merchandise. Basically nothing during the run. Like, Korra never had a toy line that aired, that came out during the run of Korra. The first merchandise properly for Korra was, like, Dark Horse releasing stuff like shot glasses and, like, a lunchbox with generic, stock imagery on it. Nothing fancy or unique. Eventually, we got, like, sort of Zwire Industries, and Dark Horse did a statue or 2, but nothing that ever felt like there was a confidence in Korra to be a success. And that's why 10 years on, it still feels like, okay, the fandom's view on it, and in a way, a lot of the way it's viewed as a quality show, that's fine. But where's the confidence shown through the merchandise? And that's what doesn't really seem to be here, which is kind of unfortunate. But getting into, I suppose, some of the discussion about just the quality of the show itself. It's difficult to talk about it because, like, I've talked about it so much. But I think the main thing I'd just say is that Korra, to me, is a fantastic show. I think it was a worthy follow-up show to ATLA, and I'll always have massive respect for it, for introducing us to this new group of characters and doing them pretty well. The lore that Korra added to the franchise is, like, absolutely essential. I don't think a lot of the discussions that I do on my channel will be possible without specifically, mostly, I think, what Korra adds in terms of in-depth lore to the world of Avatar. So that's, hugely important. Obviously, what ends up happening when you discuss sort of the quality of Korra is that it ends up getting compared to Avatar. And there's a bit of a discussion to be had about, Should that be done or not? My thoughts on that are that no. You can compare Avatar and Korra. You probably shouldn't do it at all times, but you can definitely have the discussion of, which is better, where are the strongest qualities of this show, where are the strongest qualities of that show, where do they each kind of fall down a little bit. And my general view on this has pretty much always been that I think they're in the same bracket, but I do rate ATLA slightly higher than Korra. But I think it's relatively close. Just to give numbers as a kind of sense of this, say ATLA in my mind is sort of a 92, 93 out of 100 show. That's my kind of review score generally. Korra is more of a, say, 86 out of 100. So relatively close, still in that above 85 range, but I think there are more kind of clear-cut criticisms with Korra than there are with Avatar. But there's a discussion to be had about just, I suppose, the, in a way, ambition of both shows. Because ATLA executes pretty much perfectly on a relatively simple arc across 3 seasons. Korra tries to be more ambitious by having sort of more complex arcs through the villains of each book, each having their own ideals, challenging Korra in different ways, in much shorter groups of episodes. 12 in book 1, 13 for the final 2, 14 for season 2. And the main thing you'd probably say about Korra is that if it had a few more episodes for each season, it probably would be much, much better. And I think more people would probably consider it on the exact level of ATLA or maybe even above ATLA. My thoughts on that is kind of that I think Korra had the potential to beat out Avatar if it just had a little bit more in terms of episode count and was just a little bit better with execution. But I don't think it is dragged down so much by those criticisms that there's a massive gulf between the shows. Because I do think the fact that it goes for more, it tries to be more ambitious and expansive, means that there's so much to discuss in Korra. I think Korra is probably actually, in a way, almost the more interesting show to discuss, partly in a way because it maybe has a few more flaws. Because in Avatar, most of the opinions that people have are the exact same. Everyone acknowledges it's a really, really, really good show. And the discussions are pretty much identical wherever you see them. Book 1 is the worst. It's still very good, but it's the worst. And then it's basically a discussion about, is book 2 or is book 3 better? Which often comes down to sort of solidity across the full season versus book 3's strength of massive groups of really, really strong episodes. But you don't see much discussion, I think, beyond that. Whereas with Korra, I think there's a lot of depth to be had in the discussion of it with regards to more analysis on each of these books individually, discussing them against each other, how it works as a whole. Because obviously I think book 2 is the best, but a lot of people wouldn't agree with that. And they'd say book 3 is the best, but I don't agree with that. And I have more criticisms with book 3, and then it gets into, is book 3 the worst? No. Book 4 has its own problems, but it is really good here. Book 1 is often forgotten, but is actually really, really good. And that's why I do often find book Korra just the overall more intriguing series in many ways. Just because I feel like I'm often repeating the exact same points from reviews from years ago whenever I talk about Avatar. But it feels like there's always something new with Korra to talk about, just because because in a way, like, it didn't get it perfectly right. There's almost a little bit more there to it, and there's always that sort of speculation about how much more did it need to push it over the edge to make it that little bit better. But Korra's arc across the 4 books is fantastic. A lot of the rest of the cast, I think, are fascinating characters, but there is the thing where with a few of them, I do wish we just had more with them. Of the main cast, you know, I definitely wish coming out of the 4 seasons that we had more with Mako. We had more with Asami, just in terms of an arc for their characters. And I think all that's needed is some comics or stuff like that to focus on them, to add on to that. It's not helped by the fact that we've only had 2 mainline Korra comic series. But I don't think it takes too much away from overall that Korra's fantastic. Like, when I think about Avatar, as someone who goes like deep into Avatar, my approach is typically that I'll be just as willing to reference like a comic as I am one of the main episodes from either series. And I have no problem like jumping to be like, this Korra episode, this ATLA episode. So to me, I view everything sort of on the same level. I don't have this massive preference for one over the other, even though I can sort of say that, oh, I've done lists before. My list typically is that ATLA is above Korra, but it's close. But Korra has, like, I would say some of the top Korra episodes are probably my absolute favorites in the entire franchise, definitely. That's the thing here. That the main argument I'd make is just that, like, I fundamentally disagree with this idea that some people have that Korra is just nowhere near Avatar. And that needless, I think, defensiveness that some Avatar fans have of needing to sort of almost like defend Avatar as being the best against Korra. It does often happens in reverse a little bit, where some Korra fans will try and big up Korra by really criticizing ATLA. They're both never the best, I think, approaches to take in terms of the discussions, because obviously you're involving basically negativity to act as sort of positivity for another thing. So that's kind of frustrating to see at times, but Korra has, I think, often been over-criticized over the years. And so the kind of resurgences that it has had since it sort of ended of, oh, a few years, this is sort of the opinions that people have formed, and then, oh, it comes back to Netflix, more people come in, you get more of the positive takes, and it feels like you get those distractions from those like other like big videos that everyone seems to know about, the Korra is trash videos and so on, that seem to have just, you know, appear everywhere over the fandom. And like, you'll often see on Reddit someone coming up and just be like, I watched this video on YouTube about how Korra is terrible, I agree with all these points. And it's just like, come on, Korra is not that bad. And that's the thing, like, every time I rewatch Korra, I never find myself thinking first and foremost that this show's good, but it's not as good as ATLA. Because I just get involved in the Korra episodes and how good they actually are. And like, there's discussions to be had about that, of course, but fundamentally, when I think of Korra, the first thing that comes to my head is that really, really good show. Excellent show. And in that sense, you know, it's a worthy addition to the franchise. In the same way that the Kyoshi novels are, in the same way that the comics are, in my opinion. It's a wonderful addition, and I'm so happy that, like, this is part of the franchise. Going back to what I started off with, I hope merchandising and stuff like that improves for Korra, because I love that we now have so much of an option with ATLA merchandise, but we need to get there with Korra as well. That with ATLA, it's more moved on to the idea of, like, sort of, where's our merchandise for, say, some of the more kind of secondary characters, your Mays, your Ty Lees. Suki often is left out of, like, Team Avatar groups of, like, characters and whatever. But with Legend of Korra, it's like, where's most of the cast? Like, Bolin Funko Pop was randomly left out of the first wave of Korra Funko Pops. There was no Tenzin, and there's so many other characters to cover. And the fact that there is still 10 years on a demand for all this sort of stuff just highlights that there's a fandom here, and in general, the fandom really, really likes Korra. Yes, there's some heavy criticism out there for it, but I don't think that is the norm at all. So yeah, Korra, so happy to, be part of it basically for the full run. To note that, like, basically I've been covering this show since the day it was announced and continue to do it all the way up until now and onwards into the next project. And it makes me so excited for when they finally do reveal what the first Avatar Studios project is, and we start to get those first looks that are like being in the Korra fandom when they showed off characters for the first time. I'm so interested to see how the third big Avatar thing goes, because we have a little bit of a contrast between, ATLA starting it all and having such a great reputation. Korra starting off great and having a few ups and downs along the way. I'm so interested to see now that things are more sort of social media focused, a little bit more hot takey in the fandom typically, how the reception for the next big Avatar thing is going to go. So that's where I'm going to wrap things up here. But I will say, on the podcast tomorrow, on Saturday, myself and Greg will be doing an episode of the podcast, and the anniversary is going to be one of our big topics. We're going to be having a discussion similar to this, I suppose, but Greg will be there, of course, and we will be reviewing the first 2 episodes of Korra. So we'll be reviewing Welcome to Republic City and A Leaf in the Wind on the podcast tomorrow. So definitely check that one out. Again, it'll be going up on the channel. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the 10-year anniversary. What were your thoughts on, I suppose, the official stuff, the channels, and what did or did not happen on the day? And what do you think that sort of says about sort of where we are right now? And then just your overall thoughts on the anniversary. Celebrating Korra. Can you believe it's been 10 years? I still struggle to think that it's been 10 years. It kind of feels like, for sure, 5 at least, but doesn't quite feel like 10 for me. But great show. So yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.